My name is Ben Hickey. I'm the Curator of Exhibitions at the Paul and Lulu Hilliard University Art Museum. My varied experiences in arts institutions inform my perspective of how emerging artists ought to prepare for a successful career. In the past, I've worked at the Albright Knox Art Gallery, the California Museum of Photography, the Sweeney Art Gallery, Arts Council for Buffalo and Erie County, Canisius College, the Massey Museum of Art, Louisiana Tech University, and the Outside Gallery. I have a great deal of breadth and depth in terms of seeing you from the other side. I'm not an artist myself, but I love artists and I observe you all the time. So this is just my perspective. I'm delivering this presentation with emerging and to some degree mid-career artists as the primary audience. The content covered tonight has little to do with what happens in your studio. It reflects all of the drudgery you either do not want to do or don't know you have to do yet. As a result of drudgery being central to my presentation, I apologize in advance for the lack of dynamic visuals. I hope my delivery will keep you engaged. There will be a few running jokes about drudgery. I hope you enjoy them. This is a very broad overview, and so several topics from this evening may possibly become a more focused event like this in the future. So make sure you either write the museum or vocalize what you did or didn't like or what you want more of or less of. And so with that in mind, I'll run through my presentation pretty quickly as I can. And I hope this turns into a discussion at the end. Normally when I teach this, it's more of a workshop and it's much more discussion-based, and it goes back and forth and it can be more probing. But given it's a lecture and we're short for time because of that, I'll tell you everything I know and then we'll talk about it afterwards. And then just remember, this is only my opinion and you need to carefully consider what my opinions and advice mean to you specifically. Now, I made my description of what I like an artist statement to be in the same format your artist statement should be. I feel that's only fair for the curator to have to deliver my message in as an annoying format as you have to. But also, I think to illustrate that it can be done to some degree. And so let me read, I have a 100-word artist statement and a 300-word artist statement. And they're essentially, it's like an introduction and then the conclusion to it, and you can just continue it if you need a longer version. This is what a 100-word artist statement looks like. It should convey your overall sensibility, discuss your process or materials, and reveal how some of your influences are important to you. Try recording a spoken version and transcribe it afterwards. While speaking, you may be more likely to be direct to the point. Do not be concerned with sounding intelligent or writing using words you are uncomfortable with. Please don't do that. Be yourself. If you can achieve your intellectual goals using the compositional elements of your art to build deeper meanings, you're about a third of the way towards being successful in some degree. And note, that might seem really cynical, but I think it's relatively accurate. Your artwork is only a third of your practice. And I might do, I don't know, another third of it tonight, maybe a little bit more depending on you. And then to elaborate, make sure that you cover what you did in the first paragraph, but do not make it a list. Write it so they feed into one another, maybe overlap. You know, thinking and ideas are not linear. So your writing doesn't have to be, it might be kind of boring. Do not plan on more than 3 paragraphs. Few people are apt to read it. The goal of this is to fill out the main ideas in a sophisticated enough manner to create interest and raise questions. Leave room for the work to breathe, to stand on its own. That way others like curators, critics, customers can see themselves in your work. Let other people affirm your work or write about it for you, potentially at too great a length. Let them write at too great a length. You don't do that yourself. That is better than an artist statement. That really is your goal, to be affirmed by others. Do not go on and on unless you really feel like there is cause to do so. It's okay to be the exception to the rule, but not that often. If you're always the exception to the rule, you should probably reconsider what you're doing. So that was just under 300 words. I added a little bit, so maybe I got right up to 300 words. And so generally that's what I'm looking for. It's relatively cut and dry. And I realize that it's difficult. In terms of interpretation, it's important to understand to some degree, your work is not yours. It'll be evaluated in many ways, often from your perspective with your concerns in mind, but that's not always the case. Many will interpret what you make based on their perspective. An art historian may be interested in how your studio practice relates to those who came before you. They could also be interested in the social context in which you create your work. A Marxist might be interested in your work as a commodity. A feminist might be interested in how you portray gender roles. A capitalist might be interested in your work as a commodity, and they'll be totally different than the Marxist. It's not necessarily a bad thing. When it becomes a bad thing, then it's a really bad thing. But don't feel too much pressure to know or understand every philosophical concept, or you'll become a philosopher. You won't be an artist anymore. Read philosophy and critical theory. If you don't know what that is, I didn't know what that was until grad school, personally. So it's fine if you don't. Read it so you know what others are saying about your work. You may find something you can really latch onto, but I advise strongly against it being the driving force in your work. It should inform larger interpretive issues in the background. Otherwise, it can become really pedantic and boring. And pedantic and boring, terrible. It's awful. And with that in mind, I'll proceed to the next slide. Websites. So you can see I have an asterisk, use social media for marketing. That's a great way to get out there and show it. But I don't like it when artists tell me, just look at my Instagram, because your Instagram doesn't have everything I want to see all at once. Your website is like an archive for you. And I can see your progress or lack thereof. I can see if you're dedicated to your practice. If you've taken a 2-year hiatus from your website, I might just stop looking at your website because you might be unreliable. But what's on there is really pretty inconsequential to me. Just the fact that something is there and you have a presence and you're building it is what's important to me. So your contact information, your portfolios with statements, a bio. And when I say bio, this is a nice point of conversation that came up with staff today when we were talking about this. Not your actual biography, your art's biography. Not anything don't talk about your childhood. But and common sense is funny because it's only common sense until someone tells you that that's what's meant by a biography. So your biography as an artist, not necessarily as a person. Your CV or resume, your bibliography, press, things people have written about you, and again, there's drudgery. And here I have 4 or 5 websites that I like, and so I'm going to escape from this for a moment, and I'm going to pull this up. Okay, so Joaquim Nil, he's this artist I'm really interested in. He makes his own Polaroid large format cameras. Really interesting what he does, and he's chosen to make his website kind of look like his art to some extent. So it's a conceptual take on a website. So we can make Joaquin make funny faces depending on where we're going. See, look, isn't that fun? And so it's irreverent and kind of strange and surreal, and that describes his work to some extent. And so I feel like that's fine. However, Chandra McCormick and Keith Calhoun will be hosting an exhibition of theirs soon. Here we have a pretty standard exhibition, or rather a website where we can slide through, look up exhibitions, look at portfolios. It's pretty straightforward. One more quick example is Cory Arcangel, and he is fun because he purposely keeps his website about 2 or 3 generations in terms of templating behind what's on trend. And so that's another example of artists making their work more integrated into their website. And you don't have to at all. You know, it's fun to talk about, but I don't know if that's necessary. Don't force that on yourself. And then, like, here's Kara Walker's website. It's got this great splash pad and an enter button. And everything's kind of, it looks great and it's normal on the inside. You know, it's just kind of informational. It's your archive. Now, in terms of networking, you need to attend events. Don't leave the event until you've introduced yourself to 3 strangers. Then you can leave. You don't know who those strangers are. And that's how people get to know you. If no one knows who you are, no one can help you. No one will want to help you because you're a stranger. Volunteer. You know, be a force for good in an organization. That's a great way for people to know you. Get a mailing list and use it. Make an Excel spreadsheet. Don't be scared of Excel spreadsheets or you're going to hate the last little bit of this. You know, emails and physical addresses. So you can send 1 or 2 emails to the people who like your work a year. It doesn't take a lot. And then maybe send 1 or 2 mailings a year. 2 Louisiana artists you might know are Amy Guidry and Frank Hamrick. Get on their lists and see what they're doing. They're excellent self-promoters. You know, they do it pretty well. They don't harass you with information. Sometimes it's about an exhibition announcement. Sometimes it's just an update from their studio or something they've done. Because then you can linger in people's subconscious. You know, if you're not sending those things, no one will ever think about you. Be active on social media. Again, that's kind of like marketing. Find a space and give yourself a show. Who is complaining about not having a space to show? You know, have you muttered that to yourself recently? Well, find one. Find a space and give yourself a show. It doesn't have to say on your CV how that worked. Join an organization and participate. You can join a committee on, do we have photographers? Did you go 2 weeks ago? Yeah. Well, I can't remember how long ago it was. At LSU? The conference? Yeah.
I didn't go.
Alfredo Yar spoke, and it was really cool. And that was at LSU. But you can join an organization, Skype, go to meeting. You can join an organization in Nebraska or Oregon or wherever, and you can remotely participate and build your network that way. Write handwritten notes to people. It's really old-timey. No one will expect it. No one will see you coming. Write a handwritten note. And then most importantly, ask other people about themselves. Because the thing you want the most, don't talk about it. Don't talk about getting a show. Don't talk about a portfolio review. You know, if there's someone you're interested in romantically, the worst thing you can do is talk about yourself the whole time. Isn't that right? So do the same thing in terms of professional networking. Get the other person talking about themselves, and they'll have a very positive memory of you, even though maybe they spent the whole time talking about themselves. Drudgery. So in terms of contracts and offer letters, if you have a show or you have some kind of project you're working on, get an offer letter, because you have expectations and an organization that's probably paying you money has expectations. So get an offer letter, it's like a pre-contract. Sometimes, and this is an old one from a project of mine at a previous institution. A lot of times it'll have dates, who's paying for what, when it's happening, and then some more specific details that'll be important to the project. And it's just good to have it in writing so that everyone understands what's happening. Like, are you going to have to pay for a hotel? Things like that are really important. What are the deadlines, etc. But it's all about expectations. And then put these dates in your phone. You have this thing in your pocket. Put the date in your phone, and then once you put that deadline in there, give yourself a reminder a month and 2 weeks out. Chris, how often do I forget things? Do I forget things very often? No. Sometimes. But that's what I do, and generally I don't forget things. I don't remember anything, but my calendar and my phone keep me on track. And so this is what a contract looks like. Again, falling very, very deep into the drudgery category. And it's going to have simple things like your contact info, your date, the dates again. It's going to discuss a checklist, which you might not know what a checklist or object list is, and we'll go over that in a second. Shipping, who's paying for shipping? Shipping is the single most expensive thing with an exhibition normally. Who's paying for crating? Is someone going to pay to make boxes for your work, or do you have to do that? Are you expected to pay for it? Who's paying for insurance? Will the work be insured? Who's printing the labels? A lot of emerging artists print their own labels. You need to know whether you're printing your labels or the venue's printing your labels. A thing like a checklist, which we'll cover, will also help with a layout a great deal. And they'll ask for certain things in the contract. Here we have condition reports, which is another thing we'll deal with in just a little bit. The contract lays out all of the pitfalls that you will experience for your show, like failure to receive. A lot of times it's hard to get young artists to come get their artwork back in a timely fashion. And you might be surprised to know you signed a contract that essentially waives the ownership of your work after a certain period of time if you haven't done a good job following up on that. If you don't give a condition report, all kinds of bad things can happen. And requesting a condition report is something a lot of contracts are going to do, especially in museums. Photography. There will also be specifications for the timing, the number, and the quality of the photos you provide. I hear all the time artists like, well, they didn't really promote the show. And then it's possible they didn't promote the show, but most things are two-way streets. And a lot of times getting publicity images is really hard. And it's one of the things that's complained about first, but dealt with last. So read that in the contract and know that it's there, because the venue wants to help you. The venue wants to promote you. And so, be involved in that and ask questions about it. And the venue could be messing up. Venues aren't perfect. So that's certainly another option. And again, we'll make this available with the video so you can actually read this. It looks like an abstract work of art right now, I'm sure. And then the last pages of a contract are the most interesting things that could cost you the most amount of money. They'll say things like, we can modify the contract if we both agree to it in writing. So signing a contract, entering an agreement, you can modify it. If the money is not right, you can see if they can do a little better, or if they can change the schedules and things. It's a negotiation, so don't be scared to ask questions. You might want to do it over the phone so you don't have text confusion in terms of tone of voice. But that's certainly a thing. We'll ask for a CV and a bio. I already touched on the kind of bio we want. Don't withdraw from an exhibition you've signed for a contract. And I'll get to that in a second. I have a weird order in my notes, so I apologize. It'll also determine what a sale will look like for you. Like the Masser Museum where I worked previously, we took no commission. Other venues will take a commission, and you need to be aware of what they have, and it will be towards the back of the contract. And then the two most important things most people are apt not to know about. One is a force majeure, which relates to acts of God nullifying contracts, which for Louisiana artists, I think that's important for you to know about. And so an act of God can nullify a contract. And that can be good and bad. Usually I think it's just a good thing. Everyone just kind of walks away, but money can be lost on both ends. And then governing law and venue. If you signed this contract with this past venue of mine, you were agreeing to litigate against us if anything went wrong in Ouachita Parish. And so if you withdrew and you cost us money, we could sue you, and every time you needed to deal with that, you'd have to go to Monroe, Louisiana. So imagine if you had a show in New York, or you lived in New York, and we did that, and you had to fly in and out for litigation. That could cost you a lot of time and money. And so it's just important to know that that's even an option, I think. Checklists, yay, my favorite. So a checklist is just an Excel spreadsheet. It's gonna have all the label information, nationality, the year you were born. Two sometimes of the hardest things to get from an artist. Title, media, dimensions, notes about installation, like see that hot pink stuff? It's just notes about installation issues or something specific that's happening. Some checklists are on a PDF. I like Excel because we can mail merge and sort things, and the data is more malleable. But it really helps the layout of an exhibition if I know the dimensions and what the work looks like in advance, especially if we're working partially remotely. And so there's no reason for you to not just have an Excel spreadsheet open on your desktop in your studio. You finish a work, you take a cruddy cell phone picture of it, you drop it into an Excel spreadsheet, and you make an entry. And then the question of, I don't remember that series, I don't remember what year that happened. How big is that one again? Where is it? You could have a location, it's in the flat file downstairs, or yada, yada, yada. It's really important in terms of interfacing with the venue, because you can do this incrementally, so it's not a huge inconvenience to you, and then you will gain respectability knowing that these are things people want badly. And then speaking of respectability, a condition report. If you are mailing your work, just Google a condition report and use something you found on the internet. It'll be similar to this. They're all more or less the same. And you can drop an image in, or you can make a doodle. This is for doodling. People do images too. And you can talk about if there's an abraded edge or a scuff here, or the frame is a little screwy. Because if you mail it and it gets damaged in shipping, and you didn't email me that, and you didn't have it with the work, the shipper is going to fight you about whether the work was damaged or not. Even if it has like forklift prints on it, which has happened. That is a thing. And so having this proves what condition it was before I left your studio. And then also, most artists in a contract are contractually obligated to supply a condition report, and they don't. And that nullifies certain things in the contract you might be very interested to go back and read if you ever had a contract that you needed a condition report for. But first and foremost, if a lot of other artists at the kinds of venues that you are showing at don't have this, your work will immediately gain respectability, and you will be treated with a certain degree of fear because no one will want to mess your work up. So you'll call attention to yourself in a good way if you have these. And now, so we'll talk a little bit about materials, packing, and shipping next. So I have a video that I've shot. I'm going to narrate it. I'll try and move very quickly. But then just my one thought about shipping for emerging artists is the United States Postal Service is the most gentle and caring of the big shippers with your work. They're the least convenient to work with oftentimes, but they are the most gentle I have found. Everyone has different experiences, but time and time again, that's been my experience. And so Jasmine is going to give y'all some rings with some materials that I'll be talking about to some degree, and you can see about how you ship your work. Let's see if the video works. We had a problem earlier. Here we go. Great. So, of course, first you're going to begin with art, and you want to put a nice, smooth, durable wrapping around it. Here you'll see in a second Tyvek. It's like fiberglass that's paper. If you were to take that sheet you see and do this, you can't tear it, you can't distort it. It's perfectly smooth. And has anyone driven through a housing development and seen Tyvek all over the outside of it? If you're sheathing homes and they never want to take it apart again, it's going to last a very long time. You can buy it at a warehousing supply store, and it's pretty archival. And then you're building your first vapor barrier as well. You're going to wrap it just like a Christmas present, and that nice smooth paper is going to protect the frame. You know, like for example, if you were to put bubble wrap facing bubble in for some reason on a work of art, like it's a matte finish, a black frame, it's going to get to the venue with a polka dot pattern from where the tops of every single piece of bubble wrap was just burnishing the surface of your frame, and then you can't really ever get it back the same way again. And so that's the reason why you have really nice durable material. Now, I can't afford Tyvek personally. I doubt you can, but you can use brown craft paper, or glassine is less expensive, it's less durable, but you can do that. And then you want to put a second vapor barrier around it. Here you'll see in a second Visqueen, and you're trying to make it not perfectly airtight and watertight, but you want it to be relatively impermeable, because you don't have like a space age crate that's going to be treated like that, where you do want it perfectly like that. You want humidity and temperature to be able to slowly transfer in and out of this. You know, I know some friends that run a gallery space that shipped some work from the north in the winter, and it came down here. They opened it, and they opened it the second they got it, and all of the hinges on the photos, just the adhesive gave out because the change in humidity was so intense. And they figured something else out for the show in like 3 days or something. And so I think if you've ever received an acoustic guitar in the mail, it'll say, let it sit there for 3 days. That's why, because the wood and the glue need time to get used to where it is. And then you'll see, as I'm taping, see how I'm coming all the way past and then down? You can get all the wrinkles out. As I was running through this with some staff members, our registrar, Misty, got most excited about the box building portion. We love boxes. We love crates. We take pictures of them. We talk about them. Here I am cutting cardboard. If you burnish it with the back end of a razor and a straight edge, you can make a perfect fold in it. But we love, love, love boxes and crates. We talk about it. A sculptor friend of mine, speaking about another sculptor friend who will remain anonymous, he made fantastic crates because he learned early in his career that registrars and curators love crates. And he would put them in his truck and go back to his studio, open them, take the sculptures and throw them across the room into the corner, put his crates in a neat pile in the corner. He liked how the damage kind of accrued on the sculptures. But, so to some extent that makes a mockery out of the boxes, but I think it's more important to take away how powerful that is. It makes you seem really professional. Here I am putting rigid architectural sheathing foam in here. You get a good R value from that, but then also the way that I put it in, it fits in like bricks. It's gonna be really, really tight and add structure to it. And the box that I'm handing around, you'll notice that the lid is only about 1/2 inch shorter than the base, and they lock over one another. If you were to put them back together again, it's really hard to pull them apart, and that box has been shipped around places. It's held together by hot glue. It's easy to work with, and then I go around oftentimes with tape. You go tape to tape, because tape sticks best to tape. It's always falling off of things. It normally sticks to itself the best, so you kind of make a belt around the outside of it. And so here I am. And the architectural foam cuts great. I think you may have seen on there, I cut it with a razor and I pop it apart. It cuts so nice and clean. And in this box, you'll see like a tin or aluminum paper on it. You can buy that at Home Depot, and that style in particular mimics this really high-end version that museums will spend thousands and thousands of dollars on crates, where they wrap expensive ethafoam in Mylar. It's like the beer version of that champagne. And so, it hints at something that is really good. And then the interior foam there is a little bit smaller, so that it sets right in there and it's perfectly tight. Now, the most expensive part of the box is going to be the soft foam. And so use that the most sparingly. Here I just use 2 sheets. I don't do it like a gun case where it's all the way around, it's just front and back. And I push on it just enough so that it couldn't move. And then I tape it closed. And so here I am. I'm making way better time on this narration than I did in the past. So I'll tell a story about condition reports. At one point, a young artist was involved in a jury competition I was organizing, and she had just gotten into a very prestigious grad school, and she wanted that to be known and was very proud of herself, and she was very nice, and we had a nice correspondence, and we were growing a personal relationship. But what had happened was her father dropped the painting off, and he drove it 200 miles from Texas in an uncovered pickup truck. And so when my staff saw that, they're like, oh, we need to go get a condition report right away. And the condition report was brutally honest. It wasn't even brutally honest, it was just objectively honest. There was gravel in the back, and there's just all kinds of things wrong with the surface. And then when she came to pick it up, she was furious, and a bit too furious, quite honestly. And we were able to show her a checklist within 3 minutes of this event happening, and then she was no longer furious with us. She was furious with her family. And so you could do the same thing to a venue if you have condition reports. So it's really important to do those kinds of things, because it can really save your bacon. As it turns out, getting back to a networking slide from earlier, said grad school she got into, I was very good friends with a faculty member there, and she shouldn't have been speaking to me the way that she was. And of course, he never found out about this, because everyone's allowed to get freaked out for no reason. But I mention that just to remind you how interconnected the arts community is. All the people your teachers know, all the people I know, and that it's important to do right and be good at all times, even when you really, really don't want to. So here I'm adding an address, fragile, an up, It's really labor intensive and expensive to build a box for one piece. And so what I would recommend is make it like a foot locker. You know, you might tend to work in relatively same sizes and shapes, and make a bigger box that you can fit multiple pieces in. Like you can ship a series somewhere and keep it tight and light, and you'll end up saving money. Those are registration marks that I'm adding. You just match them up because this is a very tight fit and it's not perfectly square. So if you were to rotate it, it might not fit. So those marks, those kind of tiger stripes, will help you orient it in the correct way. That's a box. We're done with it. Now, in terms of proposals, but I do love them so much. So in terms of proposals, you'll need the following things: a good website, a CV, a checklist, and a proposal. You may need an artist statement depending on what they're asking for. But the most difficult part of a proposal is that you don't have it already. But if you have everything else ready to go, you have relatively low barriers in terms of entering your work for curatorial projects or exhibition projects around. And the most important thing you need to prove to the venue is how seeing your work in person and physically arranging it will deepen the experience of the work on a metaphorical level. How can you amplify your work and create additional meanings by arranging it in an exhibition? Otherwise, it's just self-aggrandizement. You just want a solo show because you want a solo show, and you aren't necessarily accomplishing anything that I couldn't accomplish by just looking at your website and enjoying an image I saw, or seeing one work of art and enjoying that image. And so that's why when your teachers are saying, you need to learn how to work in a series, that's why. Because you need to understand how they all fit together and are stronger as a whole than as a singular unit. And you need to be able to convey that in 300 words. That is harder than an artist statement. But you need to use your artist statement as a foundation for that. Studio visits. Studio visits are just as uncomfortable for a curator as they are for you, because a curator is going into your personal space and meeting on your turf with you. And then it's uncomfortable for you because you have a stranger coming into one of your most intimate places in your life, in a studio. So just know that the beginnings are almost always awkward, and you'll just have to feel it out on the fly. Read over your CV in advance and any other materials you have. Have lots of work that can be seen easily. You don't have to clean up your studio. If you have a messy studio, leave it messy, as long as you can sort of walk in there. It's okay for it to be messy because it's a reflection of you and your process. And you know, if you were to clean it up, it might be less interesting. At least that's what I think. If you have even more work that can't be seen easily, but someone wants to dig through it, that's a very good sign. So have more work that people can handle and dig through kind of ready. Turn off your phone. Just turn it off and be in the moment. It's good advice for lots of things. Seating is a plus, maybe a beverage, but nothing elaborate. Don't order lunch. No one likes to eat in front of each other. Do you know what I mean? And don't obligate someone with some overly generous gesture, because that will make them feel obligated to you. Just be kind of strange. Some visitors will want to take the lead, others not so much. Try and figure out what they want to do as quickly as possible. If you have a strong personality and you're incapable of that, that's fine. But you know, if you don't, see how it's going to go. Ask questions that cannot be answered with a yes or no. Also, answer questions and qualify them. Don't answer a yes or no question. Always lend more, give more context. A yes or no answer in most cases is terrible. That's almost the only thing that can go wrong in a studio visit, in my opinion, is saying yes or no. Other than that, I really don't care how it goes, honestly. And then do not invest too much effort at guessing why a question was asked. Because remember, it's an uncomfortable moment for both of you. And you know, I get kind of stony-faced sometimes if I'm thinking or in an awkward position, and I could really be enjoying myself and I could ask a question, and I've done this, so I'm telling you from personal experience. I can ask a question because I'm excited about the work, and then the artist, rather than answering the question, thinks about why I asked the question and tries to answer it based on that. And there's so much lost in body language that my recommendation would be just answer the question and don't think about it. Because most people aren't inherently rude and they're not trying to insult you. They are curious about your work. If they're not asking you a question, that's when you're in trouble. So that brings me to let's talk. Does anybody, do we need to reset the cameras at all? Okay. Can you turn that on? I might do feedback if I go near that. Okay. Oh, okay. Put it back in the stand. And then, so if you have a question or a concern, please come up and contribute by speaking into that microphone so we can get you on camera and hear your voice. No? Yeah, of course. Everyone, just, you know, stand in line or you're gonna, it's just people are gonna go crazy and you won't be able to answer your question.
Well, this is a very silly, simple question. You were talking about dimensions of the actual artwork. Mm-hmm. Are we talking about the dimensions of it? Since I work in photography, I usually have a frame around my finished product.
Sure.
Do we talk about the finished frame piece or do we talk about the actual image size itself?
I think as long as you deal with it with specificity, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter?
No. I mean, it might be nice to know if it's framed or not, which is where the specificity comes into play.
So when I would describe it, I would say like 16 by 20 framed.
Or unframed, yeah. That would let me know lots of different things. It'll let me know the size, if the work might get larger, and if it's going to cost more money.
Okay. So let's say I have a print and I've cut a mat to a 16 by 20. Okay, that's what I would list as the actual size of the art. Sure.
Just be specific with the current state, because I mean it doesn't. Once you actually have dimensions for your work and can give it to someone, you're light years ahead of most other people. And so just keep track of that and just be specific and don't worry about the expectations of it. Just have a system in place.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
How do I price my art?
Oh my God.
I had to ask.
My aunt, who's an artist, pays herself an hourly wage and keeps track. That seems reasonable. I know another painter that does it by the square inch. I don't know. To me, you're asking the worst person because I pay for art in a different way, usually in a temporary way because I'm a curator of exhibitions. And so I often am worried about the other costs, not necessarily how to price the work. But what I can tell you is once you have an established price, don't change it according to region. Because if someone who's buying it at a more expensive price point discovers you're doing it somewhere else, then you can cut your nose off despite your face.
Makes sense.
So that's as far as I'll go with advice on pricing because I think I'm does anyone have a firm opinion on pricing and would like to contribute?
Look up this lady. I'm going to give you a piece of paper. She's an online art mentor. She has a really good guide, and she said that she wished someone had told her this before,
Yeah. And what's the terrible idea? And use
Okay,
specific
the
words.
idea that you pay yourself an hourly rate is the idea that I think is a terrible idea.
Okay.
Because art is a business, and there's a lot of other costs associated with the business, not just my $20, $25, $30 an hour for,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, there's shipping, there's, you know, all the business stuff that comes with it, etc. So if you're just paying yourself like an hourly wage, then you're not taking into effect that you're not an employee, you're a business owner. And there's a lot of other expenses that go with a business owner.
Well, you don't know my aunt very well.
Okay. You're,
Her hourly rate is very high.
okay, well, that's
Specifically
good
for
then.
that, she has a matrix that she uses specifically for that reason.
Okay.
But yeah, to pay yourself minimum wage or something is a terrible idea
Terrible
for
idea.
exactly those
Yeah.
reasons, or even a good wage that if it doesn't take those into account. So like paper for a printmaking project could cost $700, and
Yeah.
then yeah.
Exactly. Okay, I do have a question. This is about the bio, and you were like, okay, make it your art bio, not your life bio. Or maybe it's just more of just an observation. Maybe you give me some feedback. My struggle is I had a whole other career, and then I started over. And I still feel like a lot of that stuff is valid. And if I just kind of ignore all that, then it's like I have no background. So I don't know.
You know, it depends. Everything's a case-by-case analysis.
Yeah, of course.
You know, it depends
Yeah.
on what that previous life was and how it informs why you're making work or how you're making work now. And
Good
that
answer.
is what you need to be concerned with. Like, how is that your art biography? And then add it. Just make it relevant to art.
Okay.
You know,
perfect.
like if you liked catching crickets in a dry creek bed as a child and it has nothing to do with your artwork, that's where you shouldn't put those things in.
Okay.
I don't, you know, that's just off the top of
No,
my
it
head.
makes total sense.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank
Add
you.
something to her, it could be like part of your process. It could be included in part of your process of how you.
Yeah, it could be part of your process, exactly.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay. Part of the process.
I'm not acknowledging you unless you come up here.
I think the important thing about the bio part, though, is just to keep in mind that it's not about talking about who you are as a person, it's about talking about who you are as an artist, so that it should include things like recent shows, collections you're in, stuff like that. When they say bio, it's your biography as an artist. It can include personal information, especially at the beginning, but it's leading to what you're doing as an artist.
Absolutely. You don't have to raise your hand, just come up. It's an open mic. Jasmine will cut me off at some point, though. She'll tell me we have to wrap it up. But.
So in the condition report, I saw that there was a section about insured contact, and I was curious about this. When you have a condition report to submit to organizations, I was recently tasked with securing insurance for a project that I curated to be underinsured. What's your recommendation on artistic insurance? You know, like when you're shipping your work, but you want to, you know, have you found other artists that actually pay insurance for their art if they're like getting to a business point?
The way that, from what I understand, the way that they're insuring their work is through the shipper. They don't necessarily have an insurance policy just for art, but you can contact, you know, Liberty Mutual or Amica or what have you, and those are two that I know have fine art coverage, for example. And you can do fine art coverage for just what's in your home or for your business, and they'll give you a policy. It's just like getting car insurance. But if you're using like FedEx or something, my advice to you would be to insure it as a framed picture or a statue. don't use art words, use business words. Just because if there's damage to it, and this is something I've specifically learned, if there's damage, if it's fine art, evaluating its monetary worth becomes extremely difficult. Because like, well, art's priceless. How are we going to do this? And you'll have to do things like prove you have sold similar work at that price point. But if you insure a framed picture, people are like, oh yeah, framed pictures are expensive. That reminds me of that graduation photo. The frame was like $500, and then the printing costs way more than I thought it would, and it becomes less of a philosophical debate and more of a business discussion. Once you enter into talking about a fine art coverage, totally different ball game. But you know, because then they know they're insuring fine art. They know that there's risk and things are fragile. But if you're still just using FedEx or the UPS or USPS, that is my recommendation.
I have two questions. I'm just starting out and I do wood sculpture, and my stuff's pretty big and kind of awkward. One, how can I pack that cheaply? Because I don't have a lot of money. And two, my work takes a little bit longer. So a lot of people talk about getting in all these shows, and I feel like I should focus more on making quality work and having less shows. What is your feeling on that?
How many artists had 6 shows last year? How many? Raise your hand if you had a.
What was that?
I was in shows.
Yeah. How many shows were you in?
I think I've been in 5 already this year.
Okay, and Chris, similar number, right? Were those all solo shows? So you only needed 1, 2, 3 works of art? So you can be in a group show. You can figure out how to get into a group show and not have to bear the burden of having everything for a solo show yet. It might take several years to get ready for a solo show. If an artist was getting 1 or 2 shows a year, that's, in my mind, pretty good, especially if you are a professor or a student or an accountant or a school teacher. Get 1 or 2 shows a year and do that every year, and after 5 years, you've had 10 or 12 shows. And then you're gonna start outstripping people. You'll get better at it, you'll have more work, and it's just something to build to. A solo show is really unreasonable for a lot of artists. You know, sometimes you just don't make the kind, like if you make tiny little work, you might never get a solo show. It might be difficult. And as long as you're happy with the work, figure out what kind of shows you can get in or what you can do in terms of a venue. So, you know, don't freak out about 12 shows a year. Are they all juried competitions? You know, that in my mind, that's not quite as good a show as something that's been curated or you've been invited to show in. It's still crucial to your development at some point. You have to enter juried competitions, but research the juror and make sure their style aligns with yours. Don't submit to a juried competition where the juror loves documentary photography if you don't make documentary photography. You know, because then when you put that juried competition on your website, on your CV or website, put the name of the juror, because you're riding their coattails. That's where the prestige is. It might not be the venue so much as the juror. And it could be both, it could be, you know, it just depends, so. All right. Well, thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate you, and feel free to email the website with feedback, or tell me, or tell Jasmine, tell Chris because he's here, what you liked, what you didn't like. Chris, raise your hand so everyone knows who you are. There you go. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.